I never thought I'd say this for a variety of reasons, but the anthropomorphic animal detective subgenre is on fire right now. And by that, I mean that between the Frog Detective trilogy, Chicken Police, Ward Winklebottom Investigates, and now Duck Detective, there being 4 such games I can name off the top of my head surely means we can start calling this a subgenre, right? Right. Glad we're on the same page. And if any budding game developers out there want to make a Platypus PI, Otter Operative, or Constable Cocker Spaniel, please know you have my full support, and then some.
How are the detective thing?
It's Mr. McQuacklin.
Right. Apologies. Are you planning on staying in my office?
With that being said, if you want to lend us some support as well, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/idreamofindiegames and maybe consider becoming a member. Your support will grant you cool perks like access to our amazing Discord community, exclusive live streams, and of course the warm, fuzzy, feathery feeling of supporting honest coverage of the indie gaming scene. Duck Detective, The Secret Salami puts you in the shoes of Eugene McQuacklin, the one and surely only Duck Detective. Detective McQuacklin's story begins in his apartment as he laments his recent divorce, stresses about overdue rent, and tells us of the way he drowns his sorrows with a debilitating bread addiction. The toast helps me forget, he informs us through his internal monologue, which is brilliantly voiced with exactly the right amount of camp and dryness to make me actually laugh out loud.
First, I want to find out who the people in the office are. It will make things easier in the long run. I'll need to remember to write everything down in my deductions.
Before long, the phone rings and our Duck Detective is summoned to solve a case involving a local busing company called Bear Bus and the enigmatic Salami bandit creating havoc at their office. If it's somehow not apparent from the title, concept, footage, and my own tone, Duck Detective takes itself about as seriously as I took flossing as a child. There is silliness abound in its character interactions, impressively melodramatic voice acting, and absurd situations, and all of this is to the game's benefit, as even in the first few minutes it absolutely oozes charm, at least for the most part. This is no mindless detective game going through the motions though, unless you really want it to be by setting the difficulty to story mode, something I'll get to in a bit. Rather, the feel of playing Duck Detective lands us somewhere in between the laid-back, goofy item collecting and character interactions of Frog Detective and the deduction-based shenanigans of something like Tangle Tower. As you chat with characters about their jobs, other employees, and whatever else is needed to quack the case, keywords will be added to your journal of deductions, words that will ultimately need to be used to fill in blanks that write out the story of exactly what happened and who was involved. The overall mystery is filled with quite a few of these deductions and builds up bit by bit as you begin to solve them, starting with basics like each character's name and working up to who the Salami bandit is and why. How difficult these deductions are to fill out is down to the difficulty you choose. Detective difficulty will give you relatively little guidance past the tutorial, relying on you to collect items, talk to characters, analyze evidence, and connect the dots yourself, only vaguely confirming how many keywords in each deduction you've gotten wrong. It'll tell you if 2 or less, 3, or 3 or more keywords are wrong, and you'll have to figure out what to do with that information accordingly. If you want a more easy breezy narrative experience though, you can always select the story difficulty, which will still require you to fill out the journal, but more clearly highlights which keywords are incorrect if you get one wrong. While I know I kind of make the story difficulty sound trivial, in actuality I'm a little torn on what to recommend. In some ways, detective difficulty is actually a bit harder than I would have imagined and not exclusively for the right reasons. Discovering the relevance of a particular clue and correctly deducing its context accordingly is satisfying, but there were several deductions later in the game that seemed to require some guesswork, as I didn't understand how any of the available clues gave enough context to be able to figure out some of the more specific elements. I say seemed to require because, I don't know, is it possible I was just being stupid and my own intelligence was bested by that of a talking duck? Always. But wisecracks aside, the closer I got to the end of this 2 to 3 hour story, the more I found myself relying on occasional guesswork to keep making reasonable progress. While the story in Duck Detective is a good time and is held together by charming dialogue and fun characters, I couldn't help but feel a bit weird about it the longer it went on.
Maybe she's at home. Should I look for her?
The first hour or so was really light and silly, exactly what I expected from a game called Duck Detective. But the further it went on, the more sense I got that it was starting to take itself just a little bit too seriously. One could argue its own design required a plot with some twists and turns to ensure the whole thing wasn't over in an hour, but the humor did eventually feel like it took a back seat to uncovering a sometimes messy web of conspiracies. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but for a game that started out so funny, I couldn't help but be a tad disappointed that it eventually chose to shift its focus away from its initial run-up of jokes and wholesome misunderstandings. I can't say more without spoiling what happens, of course, but those expecting a goofy little game you can laugh your way through might find the latter half of Duck Detective can start to drag its feathers a bit. One thing was certainly never a drag though, and that's the game's presentation. I've already mentioned that the voice acting is great campy fun, and that remains consistent with each character throughout its runtime, even if the actor voicing Duck Detective himself absolutely steals the show. The jazzy, hard-boiled soundtrack does a great service to the overall vibe too, and is a delight to hear while adding just enough film noir cliches to do its concept justice. The visuals look great too, with each character manifesting as a bouncy sticker navigating an isometric environment, and plenty of charming, detailed touches to add personality. And should I mention the game runs great on the Steam Deck? Of course I should. This is a great Steam Deck game that's good to pick up in short bursts or run through in a single sitting if that's your kind of jam. There's not a whole lot more to say about Duck Detective, and I wouldn't call that a bad thing. It's a fairly short and simple game that's not intending to be anything more, and that's completely fine. While I wish its goofy shtick would have been kept better intact for its twisty-turny second half, the overall package is compelling if you're exactly the type of audience that wants to play as a duck who solves mysteries and is trying to kick his addiction to bread. Aren't we all, buddy? And while it may not linger in your head much after the credits roll, I'd still consider our short time together well spent. Even if not quite spectacular, Duck Detective: The Secret Salami gets the bronze genie lamp of approval.
Second overdue notice. I wonder at what point they start kicking people out. I have everything I need to solve this now.